Today's story starts with a text message. 5 words. I found someone else. Deal with it. No warning, no conversation, no build-up. Just a grenade lobbed into a 4-year relationship by a woman who genuinely believed her fiancé would absorb the hit, swallow whatever he was feeling, and keep the lights on while she figured out her next move. His reply was 1 word. Finally! And then, very quietly, very deliberately, he started pulling every financial plug he controlled. What happened in the 3 weeks that followed is one of the most ice-cold, legally bulletproof breakups I've ever covered on this channel. Strap in. My fiancé texted me, I found someone else. Deal with it. I replied with 1 word. Finally. Then I shut down every account I had been funding. 3 days later, her lawyer started calling me nonstop. I'm 36. I work in finance. And up until about 2 weeks ago, I was engaged to be married. I say up until because the timeline gets a little technical depending on how precise you want to be. My fiancé and I had been together for 4 years, engaged for 8 months. Wedding planned for early summer, venue booked, deposits paid, guest list mostly finalized. From the outside, it probably looked like 2 people who had everything in order. Inside the relationship, it was more like managed chaos I kept mistaking for stability. She had a sharp personality, direct, quick, the kind of person who calls it honesty, when it's really just impatience with better PR. Early on, I told myself that was part of the appeal. She was decisive. She knew what she wanted. She didn't waste time sugarcoating things. I liked that about her, or I thought I did. Over time, that sharpness started turning in my direction more than anywhere else. Small digs packaged as jokes. Comments about how my job was stable but boring. How her friends' partners were more exciting and spontaneous. How I should feel lucky she chose me. That last one came up more than once, in different variations, usually when I didn't give her the reaction she was looking for. There was a dinner back in February, me, her, and 2 couples she was close with. Somebody at the table mentioned a last-minute trip one of the other guys had put together, and she looked at me across the table and said, "Must be nice," with an expression I'd gotten pretty good at reading by then. No follow-up required. It was a small, clean deposit into the ongoing account of everything she thought I was missing. I ate my food and said nothing. That was my move a lot. Eat, say nothing. Tell myself I was being the mature one in the room. She had this recurring thing where she described me as too predictable, too structured, that life with me lacked a certain energy she craved. She used to bring up her friend's boyfriend a lot, guy who worked freelance, moved around constantly, always had some new project in the works. She'd talk about him the way some people talk about a movie they've seen too many times and still can't stop recommending. I met him once at a birthday thing. Seemed fine. Wasn't exactly paying his rent on time from what I heard, but she never mentioned that part. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I handled all of that perfectly. There were definitely times I should have pushed back and didn't. I let a lot of comments slide that I should have addressed directly because I told myself keeping the peace was the same as being mature. It wasn't. But I genuinely believed we were working towards something real. Partnership. Marriage. A version of a future that would eventually settle into something both of us could actually live in. We lived together. I covered most of the expenses. Rent, utilities, car insurance, all the subscriptions, groceries, everything that kept the apartment and her life running smoothly. She chipped in when her freelance work was going well, which ran hot and cold depending on the month. Good months she'd pick up groceries or cover dinner somewhere. Bad months she didn't bring it up and neither did I. I told myself that imbalance was temporary, that we'd even out once the wedding was behind us, and she found something more stable. I held on to that logic for a lot longer than I should have. Looking back, I think things started shifting around 8 or 9 months before the text. Hard to pin down exactly. She'd been taking on less work, spending more time with a new circle of friends I barely knew, coming home later, answering messages slower. I noticed all of it and I filed every single piece of it under, "She's just going through something," because I didn't want to be the kind of guy who interrogates his fiancé for being busy. Now I think I was confusing, not wanting to be controlling with not wanting to know the answer. 3 days ago, I was at my desk, Wednesday afternoon, pretty standard workday, when a message came in from her. No, can we talk later? No build-up, no call beforehand, just a statement. She told me she'd found someone else and that I needed to deal with it. That was it. No explanation, no apology. Just dismissal, like she was canceling a service plan she'd outgrown. What surprised me wasn't the betrayal itself. Looking back now, the signs were there the whole time. I just kept giving them other names. What surprised me was the tone. Casual, almost smug, like she expected me to immediately start calling, start asking questions, beg for details, maybe drive home and fall apart in front of her so she could feel the weight of the decision she'd just made. I replied with one word. Finally. Then I stopped engaging entirely. No calls, no follow-ups, no showing up to demand an explanation. Pause for a second. For the listeners, this is me, not him. I need you to feel what just happened here. This man got a text ending a 4-year engagement, 8 months into a wedding that was already booked and deposited. And his first instinct wasn't to cry or drive home or blow up her phone. His first instinct was one word. Finally. That's not a reply. That's a verdict. Most guys would have spent that night doom-scrolling her social media like a heartbreak NPC stuck on the same dialogue loop. This man opened his laptop. What came next wasn't a meltdown. It was a controlled demolition with very clean paperwork. Instead of doing any of the things she probably expected, I spent the rest of that afternoon doing something she clearly hadn't built into her exit strategy. I logged into every account I funded and I shut them off, one at a time. No announcement, no dramatic warning texts, no "you'll regret this" sent from a parking lot somewhere. Just administrative work that was, honestly, a little overdue. The joint checking account went first. I rerouted my direct deposit before end of business and pulled my contribution down to exactly what was legally mine, leaving just enough to cover anything that had already cleared. I'm not reckless. I don't blow things up sloppily. I document everything and I work cleanly. Then, the subscriptions. Her line on the phone plan got canceled and ported to a new number I controlled. Her service stayed active for maybe 6 hours before it went dark. Streaming platforms, logged out across every device. Cloud storage, downgraded to the free tier. The gym membership she'd been meaning to actually use more, her words, multiple times, usually right after New Year's, froze automatically when the payment card declined. Car insurance was next. The policy was in my name. She was a listed driver. I removed her. Same with roadside assistance, which she'd used twice in the past 18 months without ever thinking about who was paying for it. Same with the emergency credit card she'd had access to since year 2. The one I paid off in full every single month without making it a topic of conversation. I'd changed passwords on everything tied to my identity. Banking, email, utilities, all of it. I didn't lock her out of the apartment. That would have created legal complications I didn't need. Instead, I packed a bag and drove to a friend's place to give myself space to think clearly. No door slamming, no goodbye speech, nothing dramatic for her to screenshot or post about. I stopped at a drive-thru on the way and grabbed a burger, bacon, no onions, which is weirdly what I always order when I need to decompress and think. My friend had a spare room. I sat down, opened my laptop, and finished what I'd started. That night, she texted again. The tone had shifted, confused, edging toward irritated. She wanted to know why her phone wasn't working and why her grocery order had gotten declined. She threw in a comment about how I was being immature and petty. I didn't respond. The next day, she escalated. Multiple calls from numbers I didn't have saved. Emails accusing me of financial abuse. Messages swinging back and forth between insults and half-hearted attempts at reason. She told me I was overreacting. That couples get through worse. That I was just proving her point about my insecurities. She cycled through every angle she had, waiting for one to land. I said nothing. What I noticed was how each message was a slightly different attempt to get me to engage. Not apologize, engage. She didn't open with "I'm sorry" at any point. She opened with, "What did you do to my phone? And why is my card not working? And you're being ridiculous." Every message was framed as something I had done to her, rather than something she had set in motion. That pattern was informative. She wasn't reacting to losing the relationship. She was reacting to losing the comfort. Voicemails with formal phrasing and a professional tone, asking me to return the call regarding an urgent matter. That's when I understood she'd made a move I genuinely hadn't anticipated. She'd hired a lawyer. Hold on, this is me jumping in because I cannot let this pass without comment. She sent a 5-word breakup text, and 3 days later her lawyer is calling about a domestic financial dispute. She burned the house down and is now calling a contractor about the smoke damage. For the listener doing the math, She left him by text while already seeing someone else after years of him carrying most of the financial weight. And her opening legal argument is that he stopped paying for things. That is the kind of audacity you usually only see in a Nicolas Cage movie. The specific kind where even Nicolas Cage goes, "Okay, that's a bit much." The voicemail from the lawyer was polite in the specific way that tells you the man on the other end has only heard one version of events. He said he represented my fiancé in a domestic financial dispute and wanted to discuss concerns about shared assets and abrupt withdrawal of support. Those words, shared assets, support, I caught them immediately. I called back once, kept it short. I told him we weren't married. I told him there was no joint lease in both our names. I told him there was no prenuptial agreement and no written expectation of ongoing financial support of any kind. I told him every account I'd closed was in my name and funded entirely by me. Then I asked him to clarify what legal basis he believed existed for this conversation. There was a pause. Not dramatic, calculating. He asked if I'd be willing to meet to resolve things amicably. I said I was willing to communicate in writing only. He said his client felt blindsided and destabilized. I said his client had sent me a message ending our engagement and announcing a new relationship, with no prior discussion. I said my response was to disengage financially and personally. I asked again where the legal issue was. He didn't answer directly. I kept the call under 4 minutes. When I hung up, I wrote out a quick timeline of everything. The text she sent, the time I received it, the accounts I'd closed and when, the legal status of each one. I emailed it to myself so there was a time-stamped record. If this was going somewhere legal, I wanted every date documented before she had a chance to introduce her own timeline. That's just how I think. Finance trains you to assume paperwork matters before you know that it matters. No insults this time, no bravado. She'd reframed everything. She said she never meant it the way it came across. She said she was emotional that day. She said I should have known she didn't mean deal with it literally. She said she assumed we'd talk things through like adults. She said my response was extreme and vindictive, and that it said more about my character than hers. And then, this is the part I'll remember for a long time, she listed the specific expenses she believed I was still responsible for covering until she got back on her feet. Rent, utilities, phone, groceries, personal expenses. She used the phrase transitional support. Okay, timeout. For the listeners, this is still me. She ended the engagement by text, name-dropped a new guy in the same message, and within 72 hours had a lawyer calling about shared assets and a personal invoice for ongoing living expenses. That is not a breakup strategy. That is a business model. She's out here giving full Fire Festival investor pitch energy, big promises, zero receipts, and now somehow expecting a refund on the way out. I'm officially dubbing her the CEO of other people's overhead. She tried to cancel the subscription and still keep access to all the premium features. Bold strategy. Genuinely audacious. Absolutely no legal ground to stand on. Something clicked into place for me right at that moment, flat and clean. This had never been about heartbreak. This was entitlement doing exactly what it always does, just more openly now that she thought she had nothing to lose. I replied once, briefly. The engagement was over. There would be no further financial support. All future communication should go through her lawyer. Then I blocked her number. Within the hour, the lawyer called back. His tone had changed. Where he'd been confident on the first call, he was now careful. He asked if I had time to talk. I said no and asked him to send his concerns in writing. He emailed a few minutes later, shorter than I expected. No demands this time, just questions. Clarifying questions about the lease, about the accounts, about whether I'd ever promised continued support in writing, and whether any of the wedding deposits were refundable. That shift told me everything. He'd looked at the actual situation and figured out quickly that there was nothing there. No joint lease, no marriage, no written promise of financial support, no shared assets of any real kind. He was fishing for a hook and finding nothing on any line. Around the same time, she got through to me using a friend's social media account before I blocked that too. The tone had flipped back to aggressive. She accused me of trying to ruin her life. Said I was punishing her for being honest. Said real men don't walk away from women when things get difficult. I didn't respond, but I took screenshots. When someone starts revising the timeline before the dust has even settled, you document quietly and don't signal that you're doing it. That evening, I went back to the apartment while she was out. Took only what was mine: clothes, documents, electronics. I photographed every room before I left. Clean, undamaged, everything in its place. Left my key on the kitchen counter. No note. The next morning, her lawyer emailed again. His client wanted to explore mediation rather than escalation. There was nothing to mediate. No shared future to negotiate. No joint assets to divide. I replied in writing. The engagement was terminated by her message. No marriage occurred. No joint assets existed. I would not be participating in mediation, and any further contact should be limited to written communication regarding property retrieval, if needed. 2 hours later, she sent a final email from her own account, before I blocked that too. Long, bitter, working through every accusation she had left. She said I was heartless. She said the new guy would never treat her this way. She told me she'd expected better from someone who claimed to love her. She believed that would land somewhere. What she hadn't caught up to yet was that the moment she sent that text, she stopped being my responsibility. Wait! I need you to track the full arc here. The lawyer went from domestic financial dispute and shared assets all the way down to, could you maybe just be a little nice about it, in 72 hours flat. That's not a legal strategy. That's a 5-stage grief cycle compressed into a long weekend of emails. And what gets me is, she sent that original text genuinely confident he'd absorb it. Got a lawyer, genuinely confident it would apply pressure. Watched both assumptions fail in real time. At some point, somebody should have told her that confidence means nothing when the other guy has all the receipts and none of the obligations. The first real hit came with the rent reminder. Just an automated email from the building asking for payment confirmation. She forwarded it to me with, "This is due tomorrow. What are you doing?" I did nothing. The second hit was the car situation. She called a mutual friend in a panic because the insurance app wouldn't load, and roadside assistance told her she wasn't covered under any active policy. She'd assumed car insurance just existed in the background, like gravity. It never occurred to her it was something a specific person maintained every single month. By end of that day, the tone of everything coming from her direction had shifted from anger into something closer to fear. Concrete, practical fear. About her actual situation rather than frustration about mine. The thing about fear is it looks different from anger. Anger comes in all caps and accusations. Fear comes in shorter sentences, less punctuation, questions about specific things. When is the insurance active until, is the card permanently canceled? Are you coming back to talk? She was doing math in real time. And the math wasn't working out the way she'd expected when she wrote that original text message. I replied in one sentence. There is no legal or moral obligation for continued support following a termination initiated by your client. That was the end of the calls. About a week after that, I heard through someone else that she was moving out of the apartment. Not upgrading, downsizing. Crashing at a friend's place while she figured out her next step. Selling some of the things she used to make quiet comments about when I'd bought them carefully and frugally. The irony wasn't hard to spot. I canceled the wedding officially that same afternoon. Lost the deposits, took the financial hit without hesitating. Worth every dollar. Clean break. I want to be honest about something here because I've seen people frame situations like this as a victory lap. It wasn't. Losing the deposits hurt. Not catastrophically, but it was real money. Venue, catering down payment, photographer retainer. Probably close to $8,000 total that I'll never get back. I accepted it immediately and I didn't dwell on it, but I'm not going to pretend it was painless just to make the story read cleaner. The thing is, it was a fixed cost. A known quantity. Pay it. File it. Move on. The alternative, staying in the situation, absorbing it, waiting another year for things to balance out, that was the open-ended expense. That one had no ceiling, and I already knew how it ended. I didn't feel victorious. I felt calm. The specific kind of calm that shows up when you stop arguing with reality and just let it do what it's going to do. There was one afternoon around that time, I was at my desk actually getting work done for the first time in days, and I realized I hadn't checked my phone in 3 hours. Not because I was avoiding it, but because there was nothing I needed to see. No calls I was dreading, no messages I was bracing for, no background noise. That sounds like a small thing, and it is. But 3 months earlier, I would have described my normal Tuesday as one long low-level tension, broken up by spreadsheets. I hadn't noticed how much energy I was spending just managing the ambient stress of the relationship until it was gone, and the absence of it hit me all at once. What she tried next was public pressure. I started getting messages from people I hadn't spoken to in months. Her cousin, a former coworker of hers, a mutual friend who suddenly needed to understand both sides. That phrase is always a tell. It never means neutrality. It means someone's been handed a version of events that needs reinforcement from an outside source. She posted things online. Nothing with my name directly attached, just enough for people in our shared orbit to connect the obvious dots. Strong woman quotes. Posts about men who can't handle honesty. A few things about rebuilding after emotional damage, which collected a lot of supportive comments from people who'd only ever heard one side of things. The interesting thing about that kind of campaign is how much energy it requires. She was posting, messaging people, coordinating sympathies, all while the actual practical problems in her life were stacking up. Rent due, car uninsured, phone reconnected on a cheaper plan. She was working harder to manage how the story looked to other people than she was working to solve the real problems in front of her. That wasn't my observation at the time. I'm only putting it together now. At the time, I just saw the messages come in and ignored them. I didn't react, didn't comment, didn't reach out to correct anything publicly, didn't send any messages with my version. Silence does more damage to that kind of strategy than any argument ever could. She needed a response to keep the narrative alive. I gave her nothing. The mutual friend who reached out to understand both sides was someone I'd always liked, actually. We'd hung out a few times when things were good. She opened with a genuinely warm message, asked how I was doing, said she just wanted to make sure I was okay. We went back and forth a little. She clearly had a version of events where I'd snapped and pulled the financial rug out in a moment of cruelty. I gave her the short version of what actually happened. She went quiet after that. I don't know if she changed her mind or just decided to stay out of it, but I never heard from her again after that exchange. That was fine. I wasn't looking to win anyone over. I just wasn't going to let the story sit unchallenged with someone I actually had some respect for. Not to attack me, to appeal. She wrote about how much she loved me, how confused she was, how she'd never expected things to end this way, how she hoped they could talk some sense into me. My mother forwarded it to me with one line asking if I was okay. I told her yes, and walked her through everything plainly. No emotion, just the facts in order. She replied that she was proud of me for standing firm, and that my dad would have said the same. That door closed quietly and stayed that way. The final move was a legal-looking letter from her lawyer, but it read more like panic than strategy. It outlined emotional reliance and implied expectations without making a single concrete legal claim. It asked again for discussion. I didn't respond. 2 days later, the lawyer sent a short, neutral email. His client would not be pursuing the matter further and requested confirmation of item pickup timing. That was it. No apology, no acknowledgement, just retreat. The noise stopped completely after that. No more posts, no more roundabout messages through friends. The silence felt different this time. Not tense. Final. Final update. Once the noise stopped, I noticed how quiet my own head felt. Not empty, organized. Like a room after you finally clear out the furniture you'd been walking around for so long, you'd stopped noticing it was in the way. My expenses dropped immediately without me having to do anything extra. No background drain, no small recurring charges I'd stopped paying attention to, no low-level stress humming underneath everything about whether her work month was going to cover her share of things. The account stabilized in a way I hadn't realized they were failing to do. The emotional change was real too, but not the way people expect. I didn't spiral. I didn't miss her the way I assumed I would. What I missed was the version of a future I'd already outgrown before any of this happened. Once that was gone, there was nothing left to argue with. Friends started checking in to see how I was doing. I told them the truth every time. I was relieved. Not because the relationship ended, but because it ended cleanly. No prolonged bargaining, no drawn-out collapse, no months of maybe we can still work through this. Just a clear line and forward motion. I also had to sit with the part where I wasn't blameless. I let things go on longer than they should have. I talked myself out of red flags because I didn't want to be the guy who blew up a 4-year relationship over a dinner comment or a recurring complaint. Looking back, I wasn't being patient. I was being avoidant. I kept waiting for things to balance out on their own, because having the actual conversation felt like a bigger disruption than just absorbing the friction. That's on me. I'll own that. But there's a difference between not handling something perfectly and deserving what she did. I know where that line is. She tried one more time to reach me directly. About a week after everything went quiet, I was walking back from work when I spotted a car I didn't recognize parked near my new building. Borrowed. Different from hers. She stepped out when she saw me and started walking over like this was some kind of coincidence. Like she hadn't worked out the timing of my commute. She looked different. Not physically smaller. Energetically smaller. The confidence I'd known for 4 years was gone, replaced by something more urgent and less controlled. She started talking before I could say anything. Said she just wanted 5 minutes. Said she deserved at least that after 4 years together. I told her no. That surprised her more than anything else I'd done so far. She laughed once like I had to be joking. When I didn't follow it with a punchline, she got frustrated. Said I was being cruel. Said we were engaged and that meant something real. Said I owed her a conversation. I told her the conversation ended when she sent the text. She tried to pivot. Said she'd been angry that day. Said she'd never actually expected me to walk away. Said she figured finally was sarcasm, and that I'd calm down and want to talk it through eventually. That was the most honest thing she said in the entire exchange, that she'd assumed I wouldn't actually leave. I let her finish. What I noticed was that she kept framing it around what she'd assumed I'd do, not around what she'd done. Even in the apology, she wasn't apologizing. She was frustrated that I hadn't behaved the way she'd modeled me behaving. That told me everything I needed to know about how the relationship had been running for the last year or two. I told her I wasn't angry, and that was exactly why the answer was still no. Trust doesn't reset because circumstances change. I wasn't available for reinterpretations of what happened. She called me heartless again, said I was punishing her. I told her consequences aren't punishment, they're alignment. Then I walked past her and went inside, didn't slam the door, didn't look back. She texted that night from a new number. One line, "I never thought you'd actually leave." That was the whole point. Anyway, the new guy had already disappeared by then, about a week before she showed up at my building. I only know because she'd accused me of poisoning him against her in one of the last messages that slipped through before I blocked everything. I'd never spoken to him once. He just met the version of her that didn't come with a financial safety net and decided that wasn't something he wanted to figure out. Through people we both knew, I heard fragments over the following weeks. She told some of them I'd changed overnight, that I'd blindsided her, that I'd been controlling about money throughout the whole relationship. That narrative didn't bother me because it needed my participation to survive, and I wasn't participating in anything. What stood out most was how cleanly she'd rewritten her own role. She never repeated her actual words. "I found someone else. Deal with it," became, "I was honest with him, and he completely overreacted." That gap between what someone does and how they retell it is where trust dies and stays that way. The apartment is gone. I moved into a smaller place closer to work. It's quiet. It's mine. I sleep better than I have in probably 2 years. I wake up without that low background hum of tension I'd gotten so used to, I'd stopped registering it as tension at all. The wedding deposits are gone too. Took that hit without hesitating. Money recovers faster than trust ever does, and I count every dollar lost as tuition paid to learn something before it cost me years instead of weeks. I changed up my routines, focused on work, reconnected with a few people I'd let drift while I was busy maintaining a 2-person life that was mostly mine to keep running anyway. One of those people was a guy I'd been close with in my mid-20s. We'd fallen off mostly because she'd never warmed to him, and I'd slowly stopped making the effort to maintain the friendship separately. We grabbed lunch a couple weeks after everything settled. He asked how I was doing. I told him the short version. He laughed, not at me, just at the whole thing, and said, "Yeah, I kind of saw something like that coming." I asked him why he never said anything. He shrugged and said, "Nobody ever wants to hear it before it happens." He's probably right. I wouldn't have listened anyway. She hasn't reached out since. Not directly, not through anyone else. I heard through one mutual that she's still working out a more permanent living situation, but I don't know the details and I haven't looked for them. The silence has held this time because there's nothing left to test. No soft boundary she can work around. No emotional backdoor she hasn't already tried and found locked. That's the cleanest ending I've ever had to anything. What I know now that I didn't before? When someone tells you exactly how little they value your presence, believe them the first time. Don't argue with it. Don't explain it away. Don't give it 3 more months to see if they meant it. Just believe it. And then respond accordingly. The other thing I know is that I'm not reactive. I'm responsive. There's a difference. Reactive means you act from emotion. Say things you don't mean. Create messes that take longer to clean up than the original problem. Responsive means you let the information land, decide what it means, and act in alignment with that. She called me cold. I'll take it. Cold implies I was in control of myself. I was. I'm not in a rush to replace what I removed. I'm not downloading apps or making plans. I wake up in the morning and the apartment is mine and the finances are mine and the decisions are mine, and none of that feels like loss. It feels like what things were always supposed to feel like. Look, I'm not going to dress this up in some speech about self-respect and knowing your worth. What I'll say is this. What ended this relationship wasn't his response. It was her certainty that she could send that text and keep the infrastructure running anyway. He didn't punish her. He stopped subsidizing a situation that had been operating on his dime and against his interests for longer than it should have. That's not cold. That's accounting. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done the second that text came in? And if you're not subscribed yet, hit that button now because the next one on this channel hits just as hard.